Hey, Chandler Roll here, and joining me today is my friend Dorie Clark. Dorie is she's the author of multiple books. She's got her upcoming book, The Long Game, which we'll be talking about today. She's got a book called Reinventing You. She's got a book called Stand Out, which was named the #1 leadership book of 2015 by Inc. magazine. She's got another book called Entrepreneurial You, which was named one of the top 10 business books of the year by Forbes. She's an author, she's an educator. You may be subscribed to her email list. She's been a longtime friend and supporter of Self-Publishing School. And we've helped a bunch of folks in her community write and publish books. And so today we're going to be talking about kind of a behind the scenes of her upcoming book. I also want to talk about building kind of an author brand, becoming a full-time author. Obviously, it's something we talk about a lot. And I think Dory just embodies that. And building an email list. She's done an amazing job of doing that. So I'm going to ask some questions around that as well. Dory, welcome.
Hey, Chandler, so great to be talking with you.
So, hey, why are books such a huge part of your brand and a huge part of your business?
Well, I am a big fan of books for a lot of reasons. And I think we probably share a philosophy around this. But over the course of the past decade, I've really been studying extensively the question of how you become a recognized expert in your field. And what I've come to realize is that fundamentally there's three elements to it. And writing books actually helps with all three. So it's kind of a trifecta. The first is content creation, because it kind of makes sense. You can't be a thought leader. You can't be recognized for your expertise if people don't know what your ideas actually are. So you need to share it somehow. And a book is a great way to do it. Number two is social proof. You need to be demonstrating credibility. And books are really important for that way too. If you think about getting booked at conferences to speak or things like that, they really want authors. They want to see that somebody knows enough to write, whatever it is, 200, 300 pages sustained about a topic and have that level of expertise. And the third piece is your network. And obviously, writing a book helps you develop that, both because more people know about your work, but also for many types of books, you're interviewing people, you're interacting with people. And so it gives you a way to build your community and make sure that more people know who you are and what you do.
Shoot, yeah, it's how we met. It's in the early days. I think I brought you on an interview for maybe like the Self-Publishing Success Summit. I want to say way back in like 2015, because
Back in
it's
the day.
the work that you were doing, publishing books and all that good stuff. That's cool. And I don't know if you've ever heard this story. It's super cheesy, but I like it. It's just the root word of authority is author, and you can't spell authority without the word author. And so you talk about becoming an authority on something, and how a book's such a huge part of that. You've built, we talk a lot about becoming a full-time author, and people always ask, like, okay, what does that take? Like, there's a pie chart of things that I'm going to do to ultimately become full-time. And I feel like this has probably evolved over the years for you since you first kind of started writing and publishing books. But what does that look like now? Like, if you were to take a pie chart of kind of your income, what percentage of that is book royalties and advances? What percentage of that is speaking? What percentage of that is course sales? Like, what does that kind of pie chart look like for you? And what have you learned, and how has that evolved kind of over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. And full time is obviously kind of an interesting question as well, because I think for most authors, we're not literally spending all of our time writing the
Yeah.
book. So much of actually the part that's fun about writing books, it's some of the ancillary activities or the add-on activities that you get to do as a result of your books, like speaking or creating online communities or things like that. So in my case, the actual books that I write, I mean, it's frankly a very small part of the revenue. I think of books as being really a brand building and a credibility building tool. I earn some money from it, but the money is actually much more lucrative in the work that I do, which is around, executive coaching and work on brand and things like that on the back end. And so I would say I probably earn maybe around 35% of my income from executive coaching and masterminds that I run, probably another let's call it, I'm going to butcher the numbers and it'll probably end up as slightly more or less than 100%. So forgive me, but let's call it 40% from online courses. Some of them are ones that I run myself, like my Recognized Expert course, and some of them are ones that I do through other entities like Skillsoft or LinkedIn Learning or Exec Online. And then, those are really the primary pieces. Speaking was a big part of my business pre-COVID, that declined for somewhat obvious reasons during the pandemic. I did some webinars, but the volume declined. I am assuming that it will probably pick back up whenever the pandemic gets resolved. But for the time being, a lot of that income shifted to online courses and online learning. So, I mean, those are the primary pieces. I do a little bit of organizational consulting, but those are the large ones.
Got it. That's great. And gosh, I mean, kudos to you for building a diversified income streams through your books and through your platforms and all that stuff. Because I mean, I think for a lot of people going through something like a pandemic, when speaking is a large part of your income, can just be crippling. And so just like goes to show of not like building your foundation on a single point of failure, like what you've done with the books, with the brand, with the online courses, the online, the coaching, consulting, all that stuff to really not have a single point of failure. Now, with the books, I would imagine. So, are the books? You said you view them kind of as a brand builder. Is that a lead in and kind of a feeder to a lot of the other stuff? I'm assuming so, to the speaking, to the coaching, consulting, and the courses and that sort of thing.
In many ways, it is. I think of it as a flywheel. I haven't used the books literally as lead magnets in the way that some people do, where it's free plus postage or whatever. But broadly speaking, what I have sought to do is to create ways at different price points for people to find out about me and to get more involved in my world. So ultimately, you want to have free options for people. So that would be things like they come to your website, they read your articles, maybe they subscribe to your email list. If they think that's reasonably interesting, they buy a book for $20. And at that point, hopefully they start to get more and more interested in what you're doing, and you have different options and different offerings. And so I have everything from, a $200 online course to a $2,000 online course. I have masterminds that I run that are currently it's $15K. I have private coaching, which is more than that. And so there's a lot of different ways that people can interface with me at different price points and different levels of intensity. And some of the way that I've used the books in the early days, I mean, mostly I just wanted to write a book. That was my goal. Yeah. I've been a little bit more strategic since then. And so in many ways, this book, Entrepreneurial You, which is my most recent one that's actually out. The long game is going to be coming out in September. But Entrepreneurial You was really sort of much more explicitly tied to my business model. And I think probably a lot of your students in your community might think about it in similar ways. I wrote a book about what I wanted to learn. And so the subtitle for Entrepreneurial You, it's monetize your expertise, create multiple income streams, and thrive. And so I wanted to learn how to do it, basically. So it gave me an opportunity to interview a lot of smart folks, understand what they were doing. Literally, I tried it out myself. I made myself a guinea pig, experimenting with things, from online courses to different strategies. And then I wrote about it and shared in the book so that people could have different roadmaps.
And that seems like that is that a theme for you? Is kind of making yourself a guinea pig and writing about transitions or things that you've just done, or was that just for that book?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's a universal theme, but for my one before that, we can do more props. This one is called Standout: How to Find Your Breakthrough Idea and Build a Following Around It. And the question that was on my mind at the time, I mean, I was writing this book, it came out in 2015. I was writing it in 2013. I really wanted to get known in my field. I wanted to become a recognized expert. Before starting my recognized expert course, I wanted to be a recognized expert. And I was like, well, how do I do it? And so this was a book where it gave me an excuse and an opportunity to interview people that I really admired in the field, like a Tom Peters or a Daniel Pink or a Robert Cialdini, and understand what they did specifically to try to to build up their thought leadership. And I tried to deconstruct that process and then share that with other people. And so that methodology ultimately led to my course and community.
And then how do you serialize, in a sense, the book? I mean, you had Reinventing You that did well, and then you had Entrepreneurial You, kind of off. I think that was the correct order. I was looking on Amazon. I'm like, I feel like these dates must be wrong, or maybe they just, maybe it was just a quick 1-2 punch. Because on Amazon, it was like, it looked like they were a month or two apart. Is that right? And then how did you kind of serialize and release those books?
Yeah, so the timing, the first book, Reinventing You, was 2013. The second one, Stand Out, was 2015. The third one, Entrepreneurial You, was 2017. So it was a lot in a row, but there was a little time in between. I've now been indolent for the past 4 years. So 4 years later, Stand Out is coming out.
That's like, I think this. My brother plays in the Grammy-nominated rock and roll band Need to Breathe, and that's like record schedules. It's like every 2 years or 3 years, and then you go tour on the album and all that stuff. And then you've got the Drake method, which is an album every year. And a stable of writers and all that. And I was just giving my brother a hard time because they released 2 albums in the pandemic. I was like, you guys are on that Drake launch schedule. You got an album a year. So that 4 years kind of in the gap there. And did you relaunch Reinventing You at some point, or?
It came out in paperback. So
got it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think in 2017, it was released in paperback and I wrote a new foreword for it.
Got it. And it sounds like probably part of the promotion for Entrepreneurial You.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Got it. That makes sense. Okay. And now, so I guess coming back to kind of the present and looking ahead, because I want to talk about, a few things, building email lists, book launch stuff, all that good stuff. But I guess maybe more conceptually, you get this book that's coming out, The Long Game. How are you taking the long game with books as a whole?
Well, part of how I'm taking the long game, I was all about writing as many books as quickly as I could, as evinced by the publication schedule early on. Part of the reason I wanted to do it was, number one, I wanted to build social proof. I wanted to just get a lot under my belt because I thought, that is a way to be taken more seriously, is to create more, hopefully, high quality IP in the world. I was also worried that the traditional publishing industry was going to collapse. And so I thought I should get in under the wire before it did. It seems unlikely to completely collapse, but it's a weakened animal at this point. But I figured, okay, once I had 3, then I could actually, my long game strategy, actually, and I'm glad you're asking about this, you have to think in waves. You have to think in phases. And this is something I actually talk about in the long game. And there are times when you have to over-index on certain things. And so early on, as I was building my business and my career, I felt that it was important for me to over-index on credibility. And I just wanted all the social proof because I knew that is something that makes everything else you do downstream easier. And so I worked on that very assiduously by pumping out these books. But then after Entrepreneurial You, essentially it's a book about making money, right? About multiple revenue streams. And I said, all right, it's time to shift focus here. It's time to monetize. And so I started to really get focused on developing my online community, the Recognized Expert course, developing a ton. And I literally mean a ton. Like I've done 25 plus courses for LinkedIn Learning, like really just over indexing on that. Because I figured it was time to flip the switch and monetize. And so now I'm back, 4 years later, I've had enough time to let new ideas percolate and sort of reshift the focus to other areas of creating new IP.
I love that. And we're very similar in that way, both in, I think, in approach and in just I did 6 books in 3 years, 4 years,
Whoa.
like that.
Yeah.
And it was like, all right, cool. I'm not writing a book for a while. And the last one came out in 2016. And I'm
Yeah.
going to do an updated and revised version of my most recent book published. But outside of that, it's I'm not writing a book for a while. Like we're business building, we're scaling, we're growing, and all that stuff. But I like the kind of the blinders approach of like, all right, we're going to focus on a thing and go in on all in on that thing, and then build up critical mass to where when you move on to the next thing, that flywheel's still spinning, kind of as you said. I'm curious on the LinkedIn courses. Why LinkedIn courses? Is that a list builder? Or these paid courses? Like, I know you've got a big following on LinkedIn. What was kind of the strategy behind that, and especially behind doing all those LinkedIn learning courses?
Sure. So there's a number of different online platforms that I work with. I mean, I'm just starting to do some stuff with Udemy, which has a business branch, and there's other ones. But my largest affiliation, my deepest affiliation, has been with LinkedIn Learning, and I would say certainly it is great for exposure. One of my courses on strategic planning was the #2 most popular course on the entire LinkedIn Learning platform last year, out of about 16,000. So it has had more than 1.1 million people go through the course. So it definitely gets you a lot more new audiences and new eyeballs. I hear from people every week who have taken it and seen it, which is fantastic. But frankly, it's a great revenue driver. It's a surprisingly great revenue driver. So the way that it works is LinkedIn Learning, they've done some pilots around people being able to purchase individual courses, but in general, they've worked on building a library, and it's sort of, quote unquote, Netflix style, where either people as individuals or at the enterprise level, companies buy per head subscriptions for their employees. And, it's pretty affordable. You can take all the professional development videos that you want, and then the creators get a royalty share based on how much their videos are watched.
I see. Got it. And any tips or things you've learned? I mean, this is just, I'm kind of partially just personal curiosity. Like, any tips or things you've learned from publishing those LinkedIn Learning courses that have caused them to do so well on the platform?
Well, I think part of it, I feel lucky because in many cases they have suggested the topics to me, and they found the topics through data analytics. So, so that is helpful, doing that level of analysis.
For sure.
And, for us as authors, of course, we can do our own version of that, which is things like, you write a bunch of blog posts and you see which one's hitting, which one, are people responding to, what are they looking for? And then going toward that, perhaps, rather than like whatever our pet idea is. So that's been really useful. And beyond that, I think, it's not dissimilar to public speaking in general, right? I mean, ultimately, it's kind of the Venn diagram of being able to write well, because you are scripting this and you want to make it interesting for people, but also you have to perform well. And, you're reading off of a teleprompter. You've got to make it interesting for people. So if you can do that, that's sort of the sweet spot of what can make a great course.
Nice. Switching gears a little bit, talk about email list building. I feel like you've done an unbelievable job of this. It seems like it's been a focus. Like your email list has just grown over the years. And I think way back to 2015, when we first met each other, it was like, I want to say it was like 15 or 20,000 people. And then I looked on your site today and it said something like 57,000 people, or
yeah, I haven't even updated that because I'm getting my site redesigned right now, but right now it's about 71 or 72,000.
Wow. So how have you done that? Like, how have you built your email list so quickly, so large? Like, what it's like kind of a lot of questions at once, but like, why is email such a priority for you? Like, any tips for other authors looking to build their email list?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this, Chandler, because I'm sure you have a very well articulated philosophy. But in general, I am a big email fan. it's the relationship connection that you own with people. So, I mean, social media can change the algorithms anytime they want. And so no matter how many Facebook fans or whatever, how many Instagram followers you have, they can they can just screw you at any minute they want. And it's very, very precarious and very dangerous. So email list building is much more secure because folks are opting in, they're raising their hand, they're saying, yes, I would like to talk with you. So I think the key is creating, for any author, is creating a good and useful lead magnet, which is the thing that you give them to incentivize them to opt in. Just saying, hey, join my email list it'll get you some people who are the diehard fans, but it mostly won't get you people, because if they don't already have the belief that you are amazing, that what they're going to say is, oh, one more email newsletter. Like, I need that like a hole in the head. So you want to give them something that would be interesting for them. So maybe it's a checklist, maybe it's an assessment, maybe it's access to a special webinar teaching them a thing that they really want to know. There's a lot of ways you can do it. In my case, I've really gone the self-assessment route. And so for all of my books, I've offered different self-assessments so that people can really start to, ask themselves questions about this. And so, for instance, something that would be probably especially relevant for your audience, Chandler, is the entrepreneurial you self-assessment, because it's about how you can create multiple streams of revenue in your business. This is something especially apt for authors who often have portfolio careers about, writing or coaching or teaching, or, they do the online course. And so folks can get it for free. And this is the other key piece. You want to have an easy to remember URL so you can tell people and it'll stick in their head. So in my case, it's DorieClark.com/entrepreneur. And so any of your listeners can go there, grab it, feel free to borrow the format. Literally what I did, which is pretty easy and any of us can do, is I took the cover of the book, made it the cover of a PDF, and then at the end of every chapter, I have these ask yourself questions. And basically, I took many of those questions, not all of them because they weren't all relevant, but I took most of them and I put them into the document as self-assessment questions. Ask yourself this, think about that. And so it took me like an hour and a half to create it, because really it's just, porting it over from the Microsoft Word document with the book. And then you have a graphic designer give it a once over and make it look attractive. And you've got your lead magnet.
That's great. Would you say that those assessments, has that been, predominantly how people have come onto your email list, or has there been other lead magnets that have worked really well as well?
In my case, I've really just sort of over-indexed on it. I've created self-assessments for all of my books. So each one has their own unique thing. For this new one that's coming out, it's DorieClark.com/thelonggame. And if folks want to check that one out, the unique thing that I did, keep leveling up, is I had the designer make it so that instead of having to print it out and write into the self-assessment, now you can type into it and save it as a PDF. So that's kind of cool. But yes, that's the major way. The only other sort of strategy that I've personally used is I also created a link where literally sometimes you have a discussion specifically about newsletters. Now, this is fairly uncommon. Usually people want something, they want some kind of a lead magnet, but sometimes you'll have a conversation specifically about newsletters. There was an article that came out about a year ago that in Forbes that listed my newsletter as one of, 6 like must-read newsletters. And so as a result, I get questions about it sometimes. So I created something specifically. It's called DorieClark.com/subscribe. And it's just basically like, you want into my newsletter? Like, here you go. Here's the newsletter.
Yeah, cool. And so that's built as the quality of content, I'm assuming, on your email list has been pretty consistent and probably gotten even better. That's now become almost kind of like a standalone thing.
Yeah, that's right. And ultimately if you're opting in via the lead magnet, you get the lead magnet, and then you get the email saying, oh, hey, hopefully you want to be part of the newsletter. Here's, let's get you in the newsletter. The newsletter one, literally goes straight into that. But the main thing for people who are interested in this is that once you receive your lead magnet, the next thing in the sequence is I've created, these are autoresponders that just kind of go out automatically, a 7 email sequence. It's kind of what I will call like an introduction to the world of Dorie Clark, sort of a greatest hits. And so it's like, here's the key articles, here's the key videos, here's the things that you need to know. And then once they go through that, it's now, I think, about 40 or so weekly newsletter emails, which are evergreen, and they go into the newsletter sequence and they get it once a week. So I also do send broadcast emails, but at a minimum, it means that people are, for the first close to a year, are going to be getting weekly emails from me.
Kind of the greatest hits, and turning those one-time emails into long-term assets. That's smart.
Yes.
Outside of your books, is there any other major drivers of that email list growth? I mean, I'm assuming, that's a prominent call to action in each book is like, hey, download the self-assessment, and that's kind of just picked up and kind of month after month grows the email list. Anything else as like a channel or place source that people are coming from that's dramatically growing your email list?
The 2 biggest ones are the articles that I write. So I try to do a lot with writing for high profile publications. And so it's, Harvard Business Review, Fast Company. I used to write for Forbes and Entrepreneur. And so in the bio, I always make sure that I link to my lead magnets in that. So that will often drive a lot of people to the list. And then the other thing is podcasts, which I do not very much under regular circumstances, but I do a lot of when I am doing book launches. And so you were referencing 2015 when we first met, when I was doing the promotional push for Stand Out. That year, between February and December, I did 160 podcast interviews, and every single one, I made sure to mention my lead magnet. And, if you want to learn more, go to DorieClark.com/ in that case, for the Standout one, it was DorieClark.com/join, and people could get the Standout self-assessment. But I was always pushing that and driving people to that. And literally just by doing that, I was able to increase my list 150% over the course of the year.
Holy cow. That's awesome. So podcast interviews is a great source of not only book promotion, but growing the email list. Gosh, I've got so many questions I want to ask. Let's talk launch process for books. How has that evolved from book to book to book?
Well, I think for the first one, probably like a lot of new authors, I tried to have general conversations with people, but, it's horrible. Like, you don't know what you don't know, and it all hits you like a maelstrom. So I was just woefully underprepared. I was totally, finding myself last minute, with people being like, oh, but we need a blah, blah, blah. We need a description of your talk. We need this asset. We need that asset. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know, so I'm like staying up till 3 a.m. creating the thing that they need. So I started to just get a little more organized after that. So hopefully, this is the most organized launch yet. We'll see. But in terms of how it's changed, I mean, I've tried different things for Stand Out in 2015. I actually did do a legit book tour. I really wanted to. This was just kind of like a bucket list goal to do it. And I was able to convince my publisher to pay for it, which was exciting. It was, it was not the fanciest thing in the world, but nonetheless, I got to do it in multiple cities. And so I would speak in bookstores. I spoke in New York, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, and Los Angeles, nice. and DC. So I kind of went up and down the East Coast for it, which was really cool. I have to say, in retrospect, that they're unnecessary. They're really fun. It's really fun to do that and to be in a bookstore or whatever. But the truth is, unless you're John Grisham, you're going to be really lucky. It's going to be like really, really successful if you have 50 people in a bookstore. And that means you'll maybe sell 30 copies. And guess what? Like, even the worst podcast, you're probably going to have more people in the room for that. So podcasts or, webinars or whatever are actually a lot more effective, honestly.
No doubt. And I call it a virtual book tour, right? I mean, it's the the effect of a book tour, but it's like when you did your 160 podcast interviews over the course of that few months. I mean, that's your virtual book tour, and it's going to sell way more books because it's people who are likely to buy books.
That's right. And it has a long tail. I mean, people are still listening to those episodes today, which obviously is not the case if you're in a city one time.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. So that's how your process has evolved. Why do you think your books have sold so well as a whole? And any tips specifically for getting more reviews? I just noticed, like, as you look at like kind of the books that you've launched, it's like it seems like you've gotten better and better at selling books and getting reviews, because the reviews are climbing kind of on all those books.
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, one of the things that I have tried to prioritize, and again, I had no clue with my first book, just, out to lunch with these things, but I've tried to become more organized, is through having launch teams. And I know this is something that you talk about and think of as important. And I really agree with that. The way that I've structured it for this launch, for the long game, is so again, a useful part of building an email list is it's a built-in audience. It's a built-in way to reach people who already like your stuff. So without that much effort, right? I sent out two emails talking about it. And I was able to get over 500 people who clicked the link to volunteer to be part of the launch team. And so then I created a separate email sequence for people on the launch team with the instructions and the basic idea, again, because I didn't want to cannibalize the book sales. So I said, okay, here's what's involved in being part of the launch team. Number one, you pre-order the book. And then number two, if you email a receipt to my team, they'll get the receipt, and then they will send you the link to download the advanced galley copy. And so then they can read the book early as kind of their reward. And so then what I've asked them to do is, write an honest review of the book. And I'm actually the other innovation as a way of trying, and we're about 6 weeks out, so we'll see how all this goes. But as a way of trying to incentivize people actually doing it, I've created a Google Doc inviting them to, and periodically I'm pinging them. Okay, you finished the book, right? Good, you finished the book. Write your review now. Plug it into this Google Doc, and then the day of the launch, we will email it to you so that you can just plug it in.
Nice. That's smart. I love that idea. That's a great idea. Speaking of the launch, obviously you got the long game coming out real soon. As we're recording this, we're in pre-order mode. What do you do in the launch of this book, and what's kind of like the strategy as a whole? I mean, you've talked about the launch team being a big part of that. You've talked about podcast interviews, I'm assuming, being a big part of that. Anything else that you would consider as like a major part of the launch strategy as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, the beyond that, some of the things that I have done, one of them is, because this is now my fourth book, it would not have been helpful earlier, like with my first book. But once you have a few books under your belt, something that is useful is to keep a list of all the reporters that have written about your book in the past, because they're kind of the low-hanging fruit that theoretically might write about you again. So I reached out to all of those people personally, and I offered them an advanced copy of the book. So that's been a piece of the outreach, is, trying to reach out to people who already know me and hopefully like my work, to send them a copy of the new book. The other aspect, of course, as we've talked about, is podcasts. So I currently have about 110 podcasts that either have been recorded or will be recorded through, say, October. So wow. There's a lot of that. Yeah. And then the other piece that I've been concentrating on is bulk sales as well, and reaching out to corporations. This is more relevant for some topics than others, but if you're writing a business relevant or business adjacent book, it could be. So reaching out to people in corporations that and essentially trading a webinar for a book purchase.
Oh, interesting. So these bigger corporations, you're saying, hey, if you buy 200 bucks, or just as an example, like I'll come in and do a training that I would normally charge for your audience?
Precisely. Yeah. It's essentially just saying, yeah, I will give up my fee in exchange for this book purchase. And, it's a pretty nice offer for them because it means that whatever money they were going to allocate, they get this extra bonus of like, oh, we get the training and we get this gift that we can give to our employees or to our clients. So usually that's a deal that they would like to take.
Yeah, that's smart. And any tips for folks on coordinating that many podcast interviews? Like, how do you do that? How do you keep it all straight? Like, how do you book that many?
Yeah, it's honestly less hard than you might think. I mean, some people hire, of course, companies or consultants to help them book podcasts, and that's a totally legit thing to do. But it's not strictly necessary. In my case, again, over the years, I've been on a lot of podcasts. And so there were a lot of hosts that I could reach out to that I already knew. But also I'm certainly not confining myself just to places that I've been before. And so in terms of how to find podcasts, one of the strategies that I call the doppelganger strategy. And basically it's finding someone who you feel like is kind of maybe just ahead of you in terms of where you want to be in publishing. Like they've written a similar type of book. Like you don't want to pick the most famous person in their field because it's like, oh, well, she's been on Oprah Super Soul Sunday. Oh, let me try to be on that. Well, it's probably not going to work very effectively. But if you pick somebody who, let's say you would call them a few years ahead of you in terms of your career arc or your notoriety, that's perfect because then it gives you sort of a range of things of like, oh, well, if they had her on, if they had him on, like that seems plausible. And so you can essentially stalk those podcasts and either approach them cold or what I like to do is to go through the list and see if there's anybody that who's been on them and see if they would be willing to make an introduction to you. So it's a great way to do it. And then in terms of literally scheduling, most podcast hosts, if they are organized, if they actually take it seriously, they usually have a scheduling link, so it's actually not that hard. They'll be like, okay, Chandler, we'll have you on the show. Here's the link. And then you just book what works for you. So not a big deal.
Yeah, that's great. Dory, this is so good. A couple final questions. How I asked you a similar but slightly different question earlier, specific to the long game. I'm curious, how are you taking the long game specific to promotion and book sales for your books?
Yeah, when it comes to book sales and promotion, I mean, for instance, one of the things that I am really committed to, actually, specifically for this book, I think that something that I won't say did wrong because that's a little too harsh, and I like to be self-forgiving. But something that I could have done better in the past is that I was very good for my previous books at like really hustling and operationalizing around the launch. But I honestly think I stopped book promotion too soon. And some of the really inspiring things that I've heard from colleagues whose books have done really well, like my friend Michael Bungay Stanier, whose book, The Coaching Habit, has been enormously successful. His self-published book, The Coaching Habit. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, great book. Sorry, I interrupted your thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He really, in talking with him, he said, I had a 5-year plan to promote it. Like that's how long. Yeah. And I think that's what we really need to do is essentially not jump to the next thing, but just keep going with it. And so The Long Game, I feel like, is the right book for me to do that. It's a book I feel very proud of. I feel like it also, for me personally, in terms of what I'm trying to accomplish in my business, is useful because it appeals to both a corporate audience and an individual audience. So it has kind of crossover potential. So I'm definitely not planning to publish another book for 5 years. That's for sure. I might start kicking something around, but do not expect another book until at least 2026, because I am going to spend 5 years promoting this book.
Yeah. And it's on brand for the topic of the book.
Exactly.
and it's what some have called on the podcast the 5-year launch, which I kind of like. It just
totally
encapsulates that taking the long game with book promotion. Hey, Dory, a couple of final questions. Knowing what you know now, what will be your advice to the Dory from 4 books ago, or all the other Dorys who are out there about to write and publish their first book?
Well, the biggest one we've touched on, which is the importance of building an email list. I really had no email list to speak of when I launched my first book, Reinventing You. And I think I think it helps. So starting now, if you don't have a lead magnet, create your lead magnet, get it up, get it going, so that it gives people a way so that you can stay in touch with them. So that you, I mean, frankly, the most important long game activity you can do of all is just build long-term relationships with people. The reason they're going to buy your book, I mean, maybe they'll buy your book because they suddenly saw it and they're like, oh, that's exactly what I'm looking for. But in most cases, the reason they buy your book is because they're like, wow, I've been following Chandler for 5 years and he's given me so much value. He's so smart. I can't wait to see what he's going to do next. I really want this book. And so that's the kind of long-term relationships we want to be building with our readers.
I love that. That's great. Dory, this has been fantastic. Where can people go to pre-order this book specifically, and then to find out more about you and what you're up to?
I appreciate it, Chandler. Thank you so much. Well, this is certainly a wherever books are sold situation, but you can also get a variety of links to different bookstores and things like that at DorieClark.com/longgame. And if folks want to learn more, the website really is the best place. It's the compendium. I have more than 700 free articles available on the site that I've written for places like Forbes and the Harvard Business Review. So I hope they might be helpful.
And you said DorieClark.com/longgame.
That's it.
Got it. That makes sense. And that's probably why /the long game is the self-assessment.
You got it, my man. And in fact, I knew that like people will probably screw that up in some way, right? But it doesn't matter because they can go to either one.
the things that you only realize are strategically smart after you do 3 or 4 books, right? Well, guys, go to DorieClark.com/longgame, pre-order the book. This is a concept that I wholeheartedly believe in. And I think too many people are taking the short game when it comes to selling books, promoting their book, when it comes to goals that they have in their business. So you're going to want to pre-order this book and read it. Dory, thank you so much.
Thank you, my man. Always great to talk with you.
Yes, ma'am.